We hit all the infrastructure. Well, not all, but almost all the Iranian infrastructure in Syria. They should remember the expression, if we get rain, they'll get a flood. I hope we've finished this chapter and everyone understood.
That's Israel's defense minister not too long ago speaking about this morning's early attack on Iranian infrastructure in Syria. Reportedly 23 people were killed in that attack on the ground in Syria. Let's turn live now to our Daniel Tsemach, our defense correspondent. Daniel, you are in the north of Israel in the Golan Heights. You spent this morning covering the battle. You were live tweeting about your experience. Explain to us what it was like for you to listen to the sirens, to hear the explosions. What's it like on the ground where you are?
Well, Jeff, throughout the day yesterday, the mood was definitely tense, but the residents here were not necessarily afraid. But that's indeed before these strikes really happened. What preceded these strikes also, we must say, were reports circulating from within Syria regarding another alleged Israeli strike on a base attached to the Iranian regime. But then, shortly after midnight, we started hearing explosions ringing out. It sounded like it was coming from the Quneitra point where we were actually just an hour before then. And then the bombings just continued to ring out well into the early morning, around 3 in the morning. We saw, flares above. We saw certain projectiles flying over. But during that moment, it's not very clear what you're seeing, whether that's artillery fire by the Israeli military, whether that's missile fire coming towards Israel. It took a few hours to really understand what had transpired, which was indeed, as you have discussed already, that Iranian missile strike rocket strike, I should say, towards Israel, and that massive Israeli Air Force strike in response, something that has already been described as one of the largest Israeli Air Force strikes in recent history. So definitely a very, very active night here in the Golan Heights.
Daniel, I want to ask about what's going on now. I mean, this phrase, back to normal, what does that mean today? I mean, I understand farmers are back out on their land, schools are back in session, but kids must have been absolutely terrified, parents having to rush them into bomb shelters, hearing the explosions. What is it like for families today who live in that region?
Well, Jeff, we had a chance to speak to families yesterday, and it's important to mention that the day before yesterday, just 48 hours ago, there was a very ominous, let's say, message by the Israeli military warning of an imminent Iranian threat, that irregular activity was identified in Syria by Iranian forces. They opened bomb shelters, a very peculiar message from the Israeli military, and the residents then acknowledged that they were uneased by that fact and certainly uneased by the developments last night, and certainly this is a huge escalation. When we're talking about the northern Golan Heights, it's an area that's not unfamiliar necessarily with the sort of activity emanating from the Gaza Strip. Earlier, we actually had a chance to speak to a military spokesperson about this Iranian threat and why he views the recent actions by the IDF. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
What we try to tell the Iranians, and we have said it very clearly in different languages at all of the levels of Israeli leadership, we will not allow Iranian military infrastructure of the Quds force led by Qasem Soleimani to go unchecked inside Syria and to menace Israeli civilians and to threaten the daily life of Israeli civilians. That will not happen. We will not allow it, and we will take the necessary steps to prevent it.
All right, Daniel Tsemach reporting live for us in the Golan Heights region near the border with Syria.